if you want a comfortable retirement, that would be 54,000 roughly.
Using an ISA to generate an income, it's also tax-free. So you've got that added benefit as well, unlike pensions where you've got to pay income tax on it.
You need to screw one question out of your employer, which is, what is the match on staff contributions?
It's like a light switch. It's not on or off, it's like a dimmer switch. So you can turn it down when you need to, but then turn it back up at a later point.
So hello and welcome to the Pension Confident Podcast. This is a very special recording because this time we're not in a sound studio as usual. Instead, we're here at White City Place in London, and for the very first time we are joined by a live studio audience. Now today we're talking about the battle between two financial titans, pensions versus ISAs. Which one is the best home for your savings? Now when we thought about making this episode, the first thing we did was ask our listeners what they thought was the right answer to that question. Now before I reveal the results from that poll, let's welcome our expert panel. First up, please give a warm welcome to the Financial Times consumer editor, author and host of the Money Clinic podcast, Claer Barrett.
Thank you.
Next to her, we have founder of the excellent Money to the Masses website and podcast, Damien Fahy.
Thank you for having me.
At number 3, we are very pleased to welcome back an old friend of the podcast, financial expert, author and host of the Conversation of Money podcast, Peter Komolafe. And last but obviously not least, a face and a voice you will know from her expert commentary on TV and radio, PensionBee's own Director of Public Affairs, Becky O'Conner. Welcome, everyone. Before we start, a reminder for everyone listening here and at home, anything discussed on the podcast today should not be regarded as financial advice, and when investing, your capital is at risk.
50,000, needing 50,000 is actually more than the PLSA says you would need if you were a single person hoping for a comfortable retirement. They put that figure at 37,000. If you're a couple and you want a comfortable, which is like the highest one, if you want a comfortable retirement, that would be 54,000 roughly. But that would be between you, so 27,000 each, including the full state pension if you were both working. That brings down the amount that you would need as an individual to something more like 17,000 per year. So that's your annual retirement income.
So with these, you can invest in companies that are listed on the stock market or funds that consist of lots of different companies that are invested on the stock market. I was always put off opening a stocks and shares ISA as a young worker because I didn't know where I could get one. And I also didn't know how I would make the decision of what investments to put in it. But nowadays, it's much, much easier. The investment platforms that you can open ISAs on, there's even apps where you can open a stocks and shares ISA who have made it much more user-friendly for people to find something that's easy, maybe select a risk weighting that they're comfortable with, even answer a questionnaire about the sort of investing they'd like to do and get going. And there's certainly some fantastic guides and really practical information on Damien's Money to the Masses site. So if you're under 40, then you can open the Lifetime ISA. It's part of your ISA allowance. You can pay in a maximum of £4,000 a year to a Lifetime ISA, and you get a 25% government bonus on top. So if you paid in the maximum £4,000, you'd get a free £1,000, which attracts a lot of people. You can use that then to either put towards your first home, so long as it's worth less than £450,000, which has caught a lot of people out, or you can access it after the age of 60 and use it a bit like a pension. It has been criticised because it's trying to be both an ISA and a pension, but especially if you're self-employed, and they're some of the people who are the least likely to save anything for retirement, then a Lifetime ISA could be a really great way for you to save up money for the future and get that all-important government top-out.
And ISAs are great because, we're talking about pensions here and how ISAs and pensions kind of converge and interact with each other. One of the great things about, ISAs that often people get attracted to is, yes, you do get the flexibility that it comes with. You can access the money as and when you want to, right? But when you think about using an ISA to generate an income, it's also tax-free. So you've got that added benefit as well, unlike pensions where you've got to pay income tax on it. So that's always sometimes for a lot of people a nice little tick in the box, because this idea of not giving money to the government is often quite attractive to people when they're thinking about what options they invest in. I used to work for one of the big banks, and back then they had a defined benefit pension, which is one of those ones that gives you guaranteed income for life. I didn't know it at the time. They didn't explain it to me. They gave me two options. We can pay in or we can give you the money. So me being in my 20s, I took the money, and it was beer money on the weekends. I found out probably about 7 years ago that it was a defined benefit pension, and I still kick myself now.
When I joined my old workplace scheme, which was at the Times, which was a hybrid, so it was part defined benefit, part defined contribution, I chose the cautious fund, and I was very young. I was 25, and I shouldn't have chosen that because it grew by about 1% a year for the time that I was in it.
But presumably you had no idea what you were doing.
No, I didn't. I mean, somebody did tell me to join the scheme, luckily, because it was, again, before auto-enrolment. So thank you, that person. But I didn't get information about, which type of investment was right for my age.
ISAs are great, right? They're this great thing where you can put money in and it's tax-free, you're not giving any money to the government. But I think one of the key things that people often make a mistake on is not understanding what type of ISA they want to go for first. It's almost like this jar of so many choices, and you just pick the easiest one or the one that you find most attractive according to social media or information that's out there. I think it's really important to understand how they work. Cash ISAs, stocks and shares ISAs, your lifetime ISA. I think particularly when it comes to things like stocks and shares ISAs, you cannot get away from the immutable fact that you're going to have some investment risk with it, and you shouldn't underestimate that. It's a great vehicle in terms of potential growth, but the downside to that is also very, very real. And I speak to, and you'll probably be able to speak to this as well, Damien. A lot of the time people will think, stocks and shares ISA, it's gonna grow, and you can have a stocks and shares lifetime ISA as well. I see a lot of people with, looking to get on the poverty ladder will have a stocks and shares lifetime ISA that want to buy a house in 3 years' time. And I'm like, the risk is too high. Do you want to lose your deposit, you potentially in the market? So I think that's really important to understand what type of ISA you're actually using.
I always say to people, before you start thinking about stocks and shares ISAs, lifetime ISAs, you need to screw one question out of your employer, which is, what is the match on staff contributions to the pension scheme? Because that, in my book, is what I call the free money. So if you pay in, say, 5% of your salary, it seems like a wrench, 5% of my pay packet, they might match it with 10%. They might pay in the bare minimum and only do auto-enrolment, but the only way you'll find out is either by asking, or when you turn up on the first day, they'll give you the booklet about the pension scheme then, and you'll normally have a choice about the range. How much money do you want to put in? And often when you're starting a new job, you'll say, the minimum's 3%, so I'll tick that. But people don't realise that if they were to tick a slightly higher percentage, there could be a lot more money on the table from the employer as well.
It's not an on-off thing, it's like you can dial down and dial back up. And I've said the analogy before, it's like a light switch. It's not on-off, it's like a dimmer switch. So you can turn it down when you need to, but then turn it back up at a later point. If you turn it off, it becomes much more difficult to turn it back on. It's a mental thing.
I think that with a pension there, you do have that element of, if you're in a workplace pension and you turn it off, you're also turning off pretty much the employee contribution as well, so the free money as well. And I think that there's a lot of value to the fact that it's free money. And so for me, if you had to have a choice and you can't quite dial down enough, it would make sense to turn off the ISA than turn off the pension, even though, it's very much about that longer term value because of the weight and what that free money could amass to over that period of time.
But then if you're a director of a limited company, which is what many freelancers and sole traders graduate into, then you can make your own company contribution into your own pension fund, even if you're a sole director of a limited company. And I think when people realise that, then they start to think about pensions a bit differently because there's that extra element.
Yeah, and that's what I do. So I've got a limited company, so I pay into a pension for me via the business. That's a business expense. But I've had to think that way. And it can be very, very hard, particularly if you're kind of like a self-employed one-man band. You have to kind of separate business and personal finances. Blurring those two things can be quite dangerous.
Catastrophic.
Yeah, so I always have to try and separate both. My business funds me and my personal life, but at the same time I need to make sure the business is doing the right thing for me, for the future. You need to have a plan, and the plan should look something like understanding, right, when you get to that retirement date, what do you actually need in terms of a monetary, are you in that middle phase where you need X amount of money? What does your state pension bring in? And then also then having a look at, okay, if you've got a pension and an ISA, well, they act differently when it comes to the tax that you have to pay. From a financial planning point of view, you might decide, well, actually, let's take money from the ISA first because it's tax-free. You can kind of manage your tax payment to the government in that way and leave the pension until much, much later on. When does state pension actually kick in? There are so many variables to consider at that point that it's really, really important to kind of make sure that you're sat down with someone who can actually make those decisions on your behalf and inform you of decisions that you're actually making. Because like Damien said, you can make a decision that you think is fine in the moment, but actually 2-3 years go by, something changes, and it was the wrong decision to make.
Say I leave you my pension, and you can leave anyone your pension. It doesn't have to be somebody you're married to. My one will go 7 ways between my 3 stepchildren and my 4 nieces and nephews. If you want the money to go to them, there are massive tax advantages on passing it to them. In some cases, if you die before the age of 75, the money will go to them tax-free, or they'll have to only pay the marginal rate of tax that they pay when they access the pot. Now, there are lots of different rules and regulations that surround this, but that is the main reason that people are shoving loads and loads of money into pensions if they are wealthy enough to do so, because they're seeing it as something that's outside of inheritance tax, and it's a really great tax-efficient way of passing money on to the next generation.
But when I was in my 20s, I thought I could conquer the world. I thought I was going to be a massive rap star and loads of money and Lamborghinis and Ferraris.
There's still time.
I'm 43. I've given up on that. My mate's still going though. My mate is still going. But the thing is, right, we all think like that when we're much, much younger. And that's youthful exuberance, right? But do the two things at the same time. Contributing to a pension doesn't mean that it's going to stop you from pursuing what you want to pursue. You can do both. And I think it's trying to find the happy medium between the two. Because even if, let's just say £100 a month, right? You said, okay, I'm not going to do £100 a month, I'm going to do 50. Guess what? You're still going to amass quite a bit over that period of time. You can take that £50 and go and start a business and do whatever it is that you want to do. You can do both. It doesn't have to be one or the other, because life doesn't always pan out as we hope that it would when we're in our 20s. And trust me, I gave it a good go. I really, really did.
So I tried to explain pensions before to a group of school children like a supermarket meal deal. So like you're putting in a sandwich, but then you're getting the free money, the contribution from your employer, that's the drink. And then because you're not paying tax on any of that money and it can grow tax-free, that's the packet of crisps that the government is throwing in. So if you just take your sandwich, you don't get the government top up, you don't get the employer top up, you've got less then to try and invest in the other things you talked about, property being one of them. Well, you know, the property problem is that the government's going to come along and take quite a few bloody bites out of the sandwich in the form of things like capital gains tax, tax on rental income. So I like to put in the full sandwich, drink and crisps into my pension and think, okay, this is the most bang I can get for my buck.